Okay, this is Ralph Cantafio. It is October 5. I'm an attorney in Denver with Cantafio Song. I am the Cantafio. I'd like to spend a couple minutes to talk about critical minerals in EV batteries. I think, as everyone knows, there is a current push to substitute electric vehicles, so-called EVs, in place of the internal combustion engine, which of course uses gasoline or diesel. That sounds great, but there are some challenges, and some of the challenges are things that I think most people are not aware of. I've done a different presentation involving the time it takes for batteries to boot up. Now I'd like to talk about critical minerals in EV batteries. So that everyone is aware, there are a couple different issues. You need the minerals to basically create the batteries, and right now most of the minerals are not available in the United States, or at least not available in the necessary amount. And at the same time, the Americans are relying very heavily on the Chinese. This is somewhat problematic because we have very strange geopolitical relations with Chinese, and to develop a fleet of cars dependent upon a business partner that is unreliable makes no sense. So we're going to be talking about that disconnect and perhaps what needs to be done. Generally speaking, though, the expected growth of EVs has raised the issue of, okay, well, where are we going to get the minerals for the batteries? And most people, I don't think, are well informed pertaining to the fact that we don't have the minerals in the United States, and we probably won't for the immediate future, but that it is an issue that needs to be addressed and indeed solved. Because, as the second point says, no EV battery minerals, no EV batteries. It's basically a Chinese world. So to date, more than 16 million total EVs have been sold. That was through 2021. And these sales for 2022 were not quite there for the full year. There are some cross currents. Cross currents are that the good news is COVID has substantially abated. The bad news is that many of the EVs are sold in China that still has lockdown policy pertaining to COVID. However, when we look at EVs worldwide, 50% of the EVs are sold in China, 35% in Europe, only 10% in the United States. So you would not come to the conclusion that the United States is a substantial player in the EV industry today. So what does that mean? Well, when you're not a big player in the EV production, you're probably not a big player in the EV battery. And that's exactly what we find out, is that the Americans just really don't produce a lot of the EV batteries, and that about 70% of the EV battery production is out of China. So what's happened to date is the Americans have developed supply chains with primarily Chinese entities for the production of batteries. And as we've been alluded to, that's very, very problematic. So when you bore into that, why is it that China produces most of the EV batteries? Well, they have the minerals to produce the batteries. And that, in a way, begs the question, why don't the Americans have the minerals? Well, we do. We just don't develop. So we have to develop that infrastructure, because otherwise, in a world where we're creating more and more EV vehicles, now you're in that same bad position that we were with oil for decades after the 74 oil embargo, really up until the point in time where the Americans developed fracking and horizontal drilling. So the EV mineral issue needs to be solved, and it needs to be solved very soon. So basically 5 critical minerals: lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, and graphite. Now, these are available in the United States, but we just don't have the minerals. And USGS has defined these as critical minerals, So the good news is our government has identified them as having strategic importance. So when we break it down, the most dominant type of rechargeables used in EVs are heavily dependent upon lithium cobalt oxide, lithium manganese oxide, lithium iron phosphate, lithium nickel cobalt, aluminum oxide, and lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide. So what does that mean? Well, these are basically chemical compositions that are created out of the 5 elements. So you basically have to mine the minerals, and then you have to go through a chemical process. And that puts you in a position where you can, essentially go forward and work with your EVs going forward. Okay, well, right now we're heavily dependent. We're heavily dependent on EV batteries. And it's something that more people need to pay attention to, because it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good to develop this whole EV industry if you don't have the batteries. And it's the equivalent of having a car and no gasoline in the current state of affairs. So some of it comes from recycling, but when you look at the anticipated production of batteries, recycling is not going to get it done. We do have mines for lithium, cobalt, nickel. We don't currently mine either manganese or graphite. We do have the ability. We have to develop that infrastructure. So, how do we do that? Well, like many things, if you want to accelerate the process, you can supplement basic supply and demand with, legislation. So basically, what does that mean? Well, you can do tax credits. You can make it more attractive to entice investors. You can do a different type of taxing in and of itself. You can provide federal lands with more favorable terms. You can involve yourself in EV battery chemistry research. Do we have to use the current chemical composition to do our batteries? So there are a lot of things that are out there, and there have been congressional approaches, both in the House and the Senate, but to date, they really have not received a whole lot of traction. So where does that put us, and what does that really mean? Well, currently we lack the mineral infrastructure to supply EV batteries. So when you look at anticipated demand, we just don't have the supply, and to essentially rely upon China is foolish. Just doesn't make any sense. So, what do we have to do? Well, we have to develop this infrastructure. We have to develop not only the facilities to extract the minerals from the ground, but we have to develop the chemical industry to go through and put ourselves in a position where we can actually make the batteries. Then, of course, we have to make the batteries because you have all the minerals in the world. Okay, you can go to the grocery store and buy all the food you want, but unless you know the recipe to make your food, you're not going to have a meal. So we need to have a very significant change in our approach, and we need to do it very quickly, because when you read, certainly we are increasing our supply of EV automobiles. They're becoming more ubiquitous every day. However, until we solve the battery problem, we're probably just not being very, very practical about what's going forward. So, just like when I discussed the amount of time it takes to charge the vehicle, I think people have to be aware that currently the supply chain is poorly developed, and this is not, I should add, a change that's going to happen overnight. We need to, go through and critically think what we're doing and why we're doing it. So anyway, I hope this provides some valuable information and some insights. There are plenty of good materials. These I got from the Congressional Research Service. As always, if you have any questions, you can call me. My cell number is 970-819-2371. I am Ralph Cantafio of Cantafio Song, Denver, Colorado. Thanks. Bye-bye.